Hello, this is Chris Fody, also known as the MBTI guy. Uh, this is the introduction to a new series of videos, actually multiple video series that I'm going to be doing that focuses on MBTI. Now, psychology is a very big deal for me because I'm a writer and I want to better understand how to depict characters. Here, let me take off my glasses so you can see me better. I want to depict characters in as accurate way as possible. It's not always easy to do, but understanding what makes characters who they are is beneficial to creating more realistic characters. Now, MBTI is not a perfect system. It does have its flaws. But we're taking something that is as highly complex as human personalities and trying to simplify it. But even then, MBTI itself is a highly complex thing. The alternative to MBTI is called socionics. And I haven't quite delved into that, but works on a similar basis as to MBTI. Now, I'm going to try to be really quick in this video. So try to follow along, go back to sections if something you didn't quite understand. I could spend on each component we talk about, I could spend 1 to 2 hours on each thing. This could take me easily over 16 hours to discuss all of this in its full complexity. I don't have 16 hours. I'm going to try to truncate this down into 1 hour. So I apologize if a lot of this goes really fast. Now, let's start with the basics. So these letters represent the different dimensions in which represents your personality. Now, I'm an ENTP. So for me, that's ENTP. Now, even though those 4 letters represent me, it doesn't mean that the rest of these letters don't represent me. In fact, all 8 of these letters represent you in some form or fashion. Now, if you go to the website 16personalities.com, it will actually give you percentages of which one are you more likely to be than the other. But even then, that's not exactly what I'm talking about. And when we get into the more detailed stuff, you will actually begin to see how these letters represent you in other ways. But having the basic ENTP, that looks so simplistic. And one of the many complaints that I've heard about MBTI is it seems like your personality changes over time, and that just the letters ENTP don't seem to reflect that. In truth, it actually does, but you have to dig deeper to see it, which we will do today. Making sure I don't have any followers. I can see well enough without my glasses. I just can't see the tiny lettering. All right, so E versus I. We've got extrovert and introvert. And we're going to discuss these in more detail. The first thing I'm going to say is that the individual letters' names are actually quite confusing. They don't really represent what their name suggests. So take that into consideration. Also, a lot of what we discussed today might seem a little bit biased, more negative than positive. And I'm going to ask you not to look at it in a black and white form that there's good and there's bad, but rather sometimes something negative can actually be a positive and vice versa. So be open-minded towards that concept. Might not be so easy for some of you, but in order to understand MBTI, you have to look beyond the black and white, good and bad, good versus evil. Okay, so E and I, extroverted and introverted. When we consider the population, this is about a 50-50 split. Women are more likely to be extroverted, and men are more likely to be introverted. So it's about a 50-50 split. N and S. This stands for intuitive. I know it doesn't start with N, but that's what it stands for. Intuitive and sensing. This can also be observing, and that'll make sense in a little bit later. The majority of the population are S personality types. It's about a 25-75 split, with the vast majority being S. And when you really start to understand MBTI, you realize that that is necessary for society to function, that the majority of the people need to be S personality types. TF, well, that's about evenly split. Once again, men are more likely to be T's, women are more likely to be F's. And then you got, well, T stands for thinking, F stands for feeling. Basically, logic versus emotions. And a lot of people have misinformation about this because they think, well, if you're a T, it means you lack emotions, and if you're F, you lack logic. Not the case, but we'll discuss that. Then we got J and P, judging and perceiving. While we'll discuss these in more detail, while this is up here, I'm going to show you what J and P also refer to. P refers to this, N and S. If you have a perceiving type, and this will be in section 2 where it'll make more sense, but if you're a P type of personality, your primary function, your primary extroverted function is going to be N and S. If you're a J, it is T and F. So if I was an ENTJ, then my primary extroverted function would be T and F. P is N and S. Like I said, that's not going to make sense to you now if you don't know that much about MBTI, but just keep that in mind. We'll come back to this later. So let's go ahead and discuss, let's go to part 1 and discuss the letters in more detail. I need to get a spray to clean this off better. Put that on the list to do. All right. So we're going to start with E versus I. Now, common misconceptions about this is that they think that an extroverted person is basically the center of attention. They go into a party and everyone gravitates towards them. While an introvert, is a hermit. They're isolationists, they're loners. And in this case, we're talking about two rather broad extremes. And in truth, that doesn't really describe the differences between these two. And this is going to be one of many examples where we actually need to ignore the term names and focus on what they actually are. So what we're dealing with when we talk about extroverted and introverted in MBTI is basically 3 factors. Now, normally I would use video editing to edit out the part where I look at my notes. So the first thing is social. Now, both are capable of being social. Don't let the I and introvert fool you. Introverts can be highly social people. But the question is what kind of group are they willing to open themselves up to? An extroverted likes a large group of people. They are a social butterfly. They like to connect with as many people as possible, and they'll just say everything about themselves. They don't really hold anything back. Now, an introvert prefers a small group. I mean, they'll open themselves up, but only to a few select people, usually 2 to 3, no more than 4. They only have a very few close friends, whereas an extrovert has a large collection of friends. The second most important way to differentiate these two is recharge. Now, when life throws us a curveball, when life just gets too difficult, sometimes we need to recharge ourselves in order to find balance again. An extrovert needs to be around people. They need to be surrounded. They need to go out to a bar. They need to flirt. They need to drink. They need to party. They just need to be out there. So I'm going to say crowd. So to recharge, they need to be out in a crowd. For an introvert, I'm going to say alone. Introverts need to be alone. That is how they recharge. Now, they may be social. They may go out there. But at the same time, they still need time to themselves. They need to get away, maybe read, maybe meditate, what have you. But time alone is what regenerates them. And then when they want to come back out to the world, they're refreshed and new. Now, the third thing that really differentiates between an E and an I is that E is in the moment. As things are happening, they're very focused on what is happening now. They deal with things as they happen. Versus an I, they tend to be reflective. They tend to want to look at how things were done before when they measure on what they need to do now. E may be more decisive, whereas I is indecisive. I's need to contemplate everything before they make a decision, where E's can easily make a decision. Now, one thing to keep in mind through all of this is there is no superior one. I mean, being decisive and making decisions quick might seem like a good thing, but it's also a bad thing because maybe they miss something that an I would catch and can make a better decision. Whereas being indecisive, needing time to contemplate everything, may miss out on something because they didn't make the decision fast enough. So when we consider this, a good example of what I would call a social introvert is Captain Kirk from Star Trek. Now, a lot of people would consider him to be an extrovert. But if you actually look at him, he only has a few close friends, which is primarily Spock and Dr. McCoy. He often spends time alone. And, you know, he can be rather indecisive. He contemplates everything. He relies on Kirk. Relies on Spock and McCoy before making a decision. Not always. He is capable of making a decision as needed, but from this standpoint, this is how we would measure Kirk, as being an introvert. An extrovert, there is such a thing as a shy extrovert. Hell, I'm a shy extrovert. I love being around people. I love a large crowd of people. I'm always kind of in the moment thinking, in the moment decision making. But at the same time, I can be a little shy in public. So, all right, moving right along. We now come to N versus S. This stands for intuitive. This stands for sensing or observing. For sake of argument, we're just going to call this sensing. Now, this refers to how we perceive the world. An S personality type relies on their senses. Actually, both rely on their senses. But the difference between an N and an S is that... Oh, hold up. I missed something. So before we go into this one, let's go back to E versus I. Okay, so some quick keywords for these. So other ways to describe extroverts. They're bold, they're daring, playful, gossipy, boastful, trusting, excuse me, arrogant, talkative, outgoing, charming, egotistical, expressive, outspoken, gregarious, and adventurous. They like to be the center of attention, have lots of relationships, initiate conversation, and always be with people. Introverts are shy, cold, silent, aloof, private, distant, modest, serious, guarded, intimate, cautious, and reserved. They tend to have few close friends, want to work alone, tend to be a fly on the wall, and can be difficult to know as they bottle up a lot of their feelings and ideas. Again, it doesn't sound like an I can really be social, but some introverts will actually be within a large group of people because it's easier to hide who you are in a large group of people versus a small group. All right, so now we go to N versus S. So this is all about our 10 senses. Sight, hearing, taste, smell, sight, pain, time, kinesthetic, temperature, or 10 senses. If that confuses you, go look it up. So an S personality type, their perception of reality stops at what their senses tell us. I feel this must exist. That's it. That's an S personality type. An N personality type looks beyond that. Why, when I touch this, do I experience this? A good example that was given to me is that it's like when a child is driving for the first time. An S personality type, when they're told you press on the gas, the car goes, that's it. That's all they need to know. An N personality type begins to wonder about the mechanisms behind the pedal. You know, about why is it that when you press on it, the car moves forward, and wants to know beyond that. Now, S's tend to be grounded, where N's have their heads in the clouds. They are abstract thinkers versus concrete thinkers. Okay. S's also tend to focus on personalized sensations. whether it's, overindulging eating, sex, alcohol, vast variety of things, anything that gives them a good feeling, S's tend to focus on, versus N personality types that want to know as much as they can and as many abstract concepts. Now, neither one is superior to the other, but because S's are concrete types, they tend to be more decisive. They tend to make decisions. Something needs to be done, they go and do it, where an N type is more of the dreamer. In fact, it's the dreamers who dream up the ideas for the S's to do. But society works when we have a majority of S personality types. So there's some common myths about these. Now, when I first started studying MBTI, I thought that S's relied on senses and N's did not. And I'm like, well, I'm an N personality type, but I'm still a very tactile person. I love to touch things. I love to use my senses. Well, maybe I'm like 50-50 on this then. Maybe I'm more in the middle between these two things. And I'm not. I am definitely an N personality type. But just because S's stop at their senses and the N's go beyond their senses doesn't mean that N doesn't still make use of their senses. It's just that they spend more time thinking about the sensation beyond the sensation itself. Now, the other myth is about open-mindedness versus closed-mindedness. Many people describe N's as being open-minded, whereas S's are closed-minded. And this is an instance I talked about at the beginning, not to look at it as black and white, good versus bad. Excuse me. I'm going to cough a lot. My voice gets dry very quickly. So we live in a society today where being closed-minded is considered the worst thing you can be. In fact, a lot of people claim that they are actually open-minded, and in truth, many people who claim that actually are not. But that's really neither here nor there. But people believe that because that they are grounded in reality and they don't see beyond their sensory stimulation, that they are closed-minded. And that's actually not true. They're capable of open-minded thinking. But a better term would be narrow-minded. And I think about Hank Hill from King of the Hill. Now, he is definitely an S personality type. For him, propane's better than charcoal, and Dallas Cowboys are the best football team ever. And for him, it's like, how can anyone ever disagree with him? He's very narrow in that focus. But he has to accept that there are people out there that do like charcoal for whatever reasons they do. There are people out there who like the Green Bay Packers or the Arizona Cardinals or what have you. But he is still biased in his thinking of, oh, well, my way is the superior way because that's what I think and feel. And I don't understand. It's hard for me to understand why someone doesn't do it. But it's not that he's incapable of it. It just takes him more effort to be more open-minded to possibilities. But being open-minded is not necessarily a good thing, because while you're busy considering all the other possibilities, well, there's work to be done. All right, let's move on. Oh, we need to read the list. Okay. So, excuse me. Intuitive versus sensing. Now, intuitive, clever, erratic, curious, debaters, flexible, creative, abstract, cunning, idealistic, inventive, eccentric, inquisitive, hypothetical, philosophical, and unpredictable. They tend to see the big picture, get lost in thought, overthink, seek deeper meaning, consider other points of views, consider unrealistic possibilities, and find patterns others can't see. S personality types are vain, blunt, proud, literal, tactile, precise, factual, reliable, realistic, efficient, stubborn, indulgent, empirical, pragmatic, superficial, judgmental, and self-serving. Sounds like a lot of negative, but you really have to analyze that to see that it's not so negative. And again, I could spend like an hour to 2 hours discussing sensing in full detail for you to really understand what it is. This is just a small, tiny snapshot. Sensing tends to be grounded in reality, but they may miss the bigger picture, but they do also focus on the details of something. They have an addictive personality. Actually, they focus on the major details, but not really the minor details, unlike the intuitive. They expect others to see it their way, and they don't look beyond their senses. All right, so let us go to the next dimension, which is T versus F, thinking versus feeling. Now, it basically does come down to what is your first inclination? Are you a logical person or are you an emotional person? Now, a lot of times people get mixed up in this when we just come to the word intelligent. A lot of times intelligence is being used to describe T and not F. But there is such a thing as emotional intelligence. And when we dig deeper into MBTI, we will see what we mean by emotional intelligence. But both are intelligent in their own right. It's just that T is more focused on using their intellect to determine what needs to be done. They fall back on just the logic versus their emotions. Now, they tend to bottle up their emotions. They tend to push them aside. They're not very stable when it comes to emotions, but they do their best not to look at them at all. So, Spock from Star Trek would be a good example, or Colonel Casey from the show Chuck would be a good example of a T personality type. F, emotional. They're capable of logic, but their first instinct is to rely on emotion for them on what to decide in this world. Now, even though emotions is very much who they are, they can be as easily prone to anger as they are to love. They are fully expressive of themselves. They can have wild outbursts of emotions that are both positive and negative. A lot of people presume that if someone's an F, they only have the positive emotions, and that's not true. They have the full spectrum of emotions available to them at the drop of the hat versus a T that tries to bury their emotions. So we're done with that sheet. So that's basically what it is for these two. Now let's go over some key words for them. Excuse me. So, thinking. They're fair, blunt, aloof, clever, formal, logical, critical, planners, rational, strategic, inventive, inflexible, objective, pragmatic, methodical, opinionated, and insensitive. They are often result-driven, argumentative, a problem solver. They control their emotions but are poor showing love, is able to handle stress, and seeks the truth above all else. Feeling hasty, bossy, caring, biased, moody, loving, helpful, curious, intimate, guarded, informal, personal, idealistic, impatient, defensive, supportive, expressive, and opinionated. You'll notice that opinionated is featured in both. There's a lot of commonality between all of these. Feelers are often hypersensitive, temperamental, love to give compliments, whereas thinkers actually don't like to give compliments, is prone to depression, focuses on other sensitivities versus the truth, sees connections in people that others can't see. So you might be starting to notice a pattern where S and T seem to go really well with each other, and N and F seem to go really well with each other. All right. So the last in this section is going to be J versus P. Judging versus perceiving. Now, a lot of people think that being J means that you're judgmental. And you are, but that's not what the J is referring to. As before, it refers to T and F. Okay. So the judging is basically that you're a very organized person. You're detailed oriented. You're very structured in how you do things. You prefer things to be done one way. When you're slow to make a decision because you want to consider all the possibilities. But when you're ready to make a decision, you are firm in your decisions. So you can be indecisive, but you can also be dedicated at the same time. And it seems contradictory, but it's like you take your time to make your decisions, but once you make them, you can't derail that person from their decision. Whereas P is completely the opposite. A P personality type is someone who is relaxed, someone who is chaotic, who loves to jump in from thing to thing. They're quick to make decisions, and they're also quick to change their mind about something. They often lack commitment to an idea. The good way to look at this is like a corporate business type versus a hippie. Now, I'm not saying that all P-type people are hippies. I mean, I'm an ENTP and I'm not a hippie, but it's a good way to kind of picture this. So let's look at some keywords here. Okay, so J, judging, is tidy, strict, rigid, formal, critical, cautious. A planner, orderly, diligent, focused, efficient, strategic, stubborn, inflexible, organized, ambitious, controlled, and methodical. They tend to be hardworking, goal-oriented. They seek stability, stick to a plan, have high standards, They hate last minute work. I mean, once they get an assignment, they start working on it. They don't wait till the last minute to do something. They take linear steps towards goals, and they finish a task before starting another. Perceiving. They're lazy, hasty, casual, sloppy, flexible, reckless, scattered, impulsive, adaptable, rebellious, spontaneous, adventurous, procrastinate, disorganized, unpredictable. They tend to be nonconformists. They dislike routine. They don't like to make plans. They work in bursts. They keep their options open. They can take unnecessary risks, be easily dissuaded from a task, and they stop and start projects easily. Okay, so that concludes this section. We discussed the individual letters and how they operate, how they differentiate between each other. Now, our next section. But before I discuss that, I want to go back to E versus I and discuss A. Ambivert. Now, a lot of people believe that they're ambivert. Ambivert is a middle ground between extrovert and introvert, meaning that you're technically both at the exact same time. A lot of people feel this way, that sometimes they are extroverted, but sometimes they're introverted. But I'm going to tell you two things. One, MBTI does not account for ambivertness, at least not directly, but it does so in an indirect way that's not readily apparent until you start looking at the bigger picture. Then it's like, oh, okay, so that's how someone can be ambivert. But secondly, and I've kind of already stated this, MBTI does not take ambivert into consideration. As far as it's concerned, at any one time, you're either an extrovert or an introvert. Now, you might be using both at the same time for different functions of your personality, but you're not using both at the same time for a single function of your personality. That's about to make sense in just a short time, so stay with me on that. I acknowledge that it's possible to be ambivert, but it's actually very rare to be ambivert. All right, so you basically have what's called cognitive functions. And these map out how your personality is at any given point in your life. Now, you actually have 8 cognitive functions. Well, we're only going to focus on the first 4. The second 4 is what we call shadow functions, but according to research, it only represents about 1% of your overall personality, and most people ignore shadow functions. So we're only going to focus on the first 4 functions. The first 4 is dominant, and I'm a bad speller, so if I try to spell that, I know I'm going to misspell it. Auxiliary, tertiary, and inferior. Dominant. Well, it's the first the first of our cognitive functions that we rely on. That any decision that's given to us, this is where we go first and foremost. Now, this and this is real generalized stuff. Every person is different. But this is a generalization that this begins around 8 years old. That's when you start developing your dominant function. That's when a personality really starts to take shape. Before that, it's kind of intermixed between all of this, but it's mostly a dom inferior mix and some of your shadow functions. And you don't fully develop this until about 13. Now, your auxiliary function actually works in opposition to your dominant function. They often clash with each other. And this is done because if you rely just on your dominant function, there are things in life you're going to miss out on. So you need your auxiliary function to kind of point it out to you. It can act as a filtering process from your dominant inclinations. Like, wait a minute, you need to consider this, this, and this. Now, the auxiliary function hits us around puberty. Generalization, that's 13 years old. Some people hit puberty before then, some later than that. But it's around puberty we hit this. And this actually can explain teenagers who seem to have a sudden change in their personalities. Despite how they were growing up, suddenly they seem to be quite different. This can be explained by the auxiliary taking effect. Now, this doesn't fully develop until about somewhere between 18 and 24, but I'm going to say 21 years old. So that's about how long it takes for this to develop. Your tertiary, so these two right here account for 90% of your personality. Whatever situation you come into, your dominant and auxiliary should be able to resolve that problem. But then sometimes you encounter something that neither your dominant or auxiliary can handle. And this is where the tertiary comes in. Now, your tertiary doesn't really begin to develop until age 25. Somewhere between 25 and 30, but usually it's about 25. Now, if the auxiliary develops at puberty, tertiary develops when you have fully formed your prefrontal cortex, which in my opinion is when you become a full adult, when your brain is fully structured, fully formed, which doesn't happen until you're about 25 years old. Of course, this can be delayed for a number of reasons. But what's also interesting about this is that your tertiary can actually find itself in the auxiliary. That during this period, although it's usually around 16, you might actually start tapping into this, but it's going to be highly unstable. So that's why it's so confusing for teenagers, because they have their old personality, they have their future personality, and they have their current personality all at conflict with each other at a single moment in their lives. So that kind of explains a lot. Now, this can take up to 35. It depends on when this actually starts to form and how quickly you go through it, depending on what elements of your life you're going through. But, I mean, this could take you from 25 to 30, 25 to 40. Every person is different, but generally 25 to 35 is the expected time it takes to fully form your tertiary function. But, of course, your adult life is quite difficult. So And this kind of explains why. You're not a teenager anymore. You can't rely on the things you did as a teenager. But now that your auxiliary is fully formed, then you have your tertiary. But something else can happen during the development of your tertiary where you can have this support this and ignore that. It's what we call a tertiary temptation. And this is because the dominant and the tertiary flow in the same direction. And I'll explain that in just a moment. Usually that is short-lived, but it could last the rest of your life depending on what it is that you're doing. The last we have is inferior. And like we described, the tertiary sometimes being tapped into by the auxiliary at the age of 16, about 9 years before it starts to develop. The same thing happens with the inferior when it comes to the dominant trait. Now, the inferior is basically our dark side. When we are stressed, when we're just overwhelmed with life, emotions, what have you, our inferior can take over the dominant function. But it's usually the worst qualities about us. So we start tapping into this almost immediately as we do the dom function. And it is basically the exact opposite of who we are. But eventually we start to develop this. And in developing this, that's when we become a full-rounded person. But that doesn't start until about 40 years old. And most people don't even make it to this point in their maturity. And in all honesty, it can take however long it does. I mean, it could be until you're 45 years old. It could be until you're 70 years old. It just depends on what's happening on your life. Generally, though, I would say it's about 50 years old. So, again, this is a very quick snapshot of this. And it is far more complex than that. But let me show you what this has to do with MBTI. Because it seems like we've started talking about something else altogether. Okay, so we've got our dom, auxiliary, tertiary, and our inferior. Okay. Now, E versus I. Now, let's take, for example, I am an ENTP. Okay. So my first function here being an E means that my actually I'm going, yeah, that's fine. Actually, I'm going to switch these to make a little bit more sense, at least for American viewers. EI. So that means that my dominant function is in an outward direction. This means also that my auxiliary is an internal function because it's the opposite of the dom as far as this direction goes. As I said, the tertiary is parallel to the dom, so it flows in an outward direction. And likewise, inferior becomes internal. Now, if I change this to an I, INTP, as you would expect, the dominant function becomes internal. Auxiliary becomes external. And this is important to note Because when it comes to introverted personalities, it is their auxiliary function that we tend to know anything about them, because that's what they're expressing themselves with, is their auxiliary function. So it can sometimes confuse us about what their personality is if we only see their auxiliary function, versus an extroverted personality, we see their dom function. So we'll go ahead and update that. So that's how it basically works. So how do we use this then for MBTI? So go back to me, ENTP. Well, as I said, the P is perceiving, and it's for the NS. So this tells me that this is my extroverted function. So I know that it's extroverted. This is introverted, extroverted, introverted. EIEIO. Sorry, couldn't resist. So EIEI. Well, I know N is my most extroverted function. This means that my introverted function is T. Now, to figure out my tertiary, it has to be the opposite of this, which then becomes F. My inferior is going to be opposite of my dominant function. Well, the opposite of N is S. The opposite of E is I. So this becomes SI. So NETI FE SI. And I know that might be confusing right now. It's like, what? We watched that a couple of times before you get it, but I'm going to change it up a bit. So we're going to do E S F J. Okay, well, J represents T and F. So that tells me that my most extroverted function is F, which will be my dominant function, FE. Which means that my introverted function is going to be S, SI. Now, the opposite of SI is NE. And the opposite of FE is TI. Now, you're going to notice that if you go back to ENTP, that these were all the same functions, but in different order. Don't be too concerned about the implications of what that means. In future videos, I will discuss that more, but just focus on how I derive that. So J told me that my J plus the E tells me that my extroverted function is F, which is my dominant function. Since E tells me that my dominant function is extroverted. This E refers to that E right there. So FE. This means by default, the other letter in my 4 letters, S, is an introverted function. The opposite of my introverted function is NE. And the opposite of my dominant function is TI. So this becomes FE SI NE TI. Now, what happens when I have an ISTP? Now, as we've shown before, my dominant function with this I tells me that this flows inward. So my dominant function is inward. Auxiliary is outward. Tertiary is inward. Inferior is outward. Okay. So P tells me that my extroverted function is the S and N. So do I put S here? No, because once again, what I said specifically is that this letter here tells me what my extroverted function is. So if S is my extroverted function, then I go to the topmost extroverted function, which is auxiliary. So this becomes S. So that means by default, the other letter is my introverted function. So we put that there. The opposite of SE is NI. Opposite of TI is FE. So this becomes TI SE NI FE. So let's do one more example. And I know that is confusing. Let us do INFJ. Well, I know that this is going to be an I based on what that is telling me right there. That's INFJ. Tells me my dominant function is I, E, I, E. The J here points to my extroverted function, which is going to be F or T. In this case, it's F. So I find my highest extroverted function, which is the auxiliary, so that is FE. The other one, by default, becomes introverted, NI. So the tertiary is the opposite of FE, so this is TI. Inferior is going to be opposite of the dominant function, which is SE. So I know that's a lot to go over, and you might be wondering why. Why is it set up like this? And there's a whole philosophy behind this. It does actually work out. It does actually make a lot of sense. I just don't have the time right now to discuss it. And I really need to go to the next part. As I mentioned, in this case, it's the auxiliary function that we most know about a person because this is moving outward versus the dominant, which is moving inward. Now, you'll also notice here what I was talking about with ambivert, where someone is both an introvert and an extrovert. Well, in this case, if their two functions are working together, as they should be, then this person can act as an introvert and an extrovert between two functions at the same time. And that's why some people think that they might be ambivert when in truth they're not. It's just this is how their personality works, is that you're both using your introverted and extroverted traits in unison amongst different functions of your personality. All right, so we're going to now discuss these individual combinations. First, we're going to start with NE. Stands for extroverted intuition. I don't know why it's not EN, since that's how it's read, but well, they don't ask me these things. So extroverted intuition. Well, we already know what those two stand by themselves. Extroverted is that you're gregarious, you're outgoing, you're outspoken, and is that your heads are in the clouds, you consider abstract ideas, things like that. So I'm going to be real quick through this section. So extroverted intuition: bold, brash, hasty, noisy, lively, caring, artistic, flexible, curious, creative, unstable, versatile, impartial, impulsive, adaptable, distractible, innovative, perceptive, impractical, uninhibited, resourceful, and idealistic. They tend to be a good listener, open-minded. We've talked about open-minded already. A quick thinker. They seek new ideas. They're novelty-seeking, habitual naysayer, easily persuaded, looking for unique connections, discuss various points of views, have lots of interests. So that's an NE in a nutshell. So let's look at its sibling, an I. An I, well, we know what introvert is. It's someone who can disconnect from the world around them. They're very internalized in what they do. But an N is also an abstract thinker, heads in the clouds. So these two combine as deep, blunt, aloof, bossy, driven, intense, critical, serious, flexible, rational, guarded, dreamer, nitpicky, idealistic, secretive, dramatic, obstinate, resentful, organized, imaginative, questioning, appreciative, and abstract. They tend to love ideas. They think in the long term. Now, as I said, I personality types are past-oriented and future-oriented. They think about the past and the future, where E's tend to only think in the present. So anytime you see an I, odds are they are planners, future-oriented. They compare present to the past knowledge. So in this instance, because they think about the past, anything that happens in the present, they consider what's already happened as their litmus of what they should do. Dislikes being controlled, understands contradictory ideas. They think in images rather than words. They summarize complex ideas or conversations within one sentence. And they have this need to prove that they are unique from everyone else in the world. Now, a lot of these, there's good and bad to them. And like I said, I'm only taking a snapshot of these. But these are highly complex ideas that I'm just taking a small sample of. And there is no one that is superior to the other. And while I'm an ENTP and I might think that mine, is very beneficial to the world, I also acknowledge that all of the others have their purpose and that there is good and bad within all of them. And I told you not to think of in terms of good and bad, but there is no one that's the ultimate good and one that's the ultimate bad. There is shades of gray in all of them. Okay, so extroverted sensing. They are blunt, active, selfish, playful, sensual, athletic, flexible, friendly, insistent, realistic, practical, reckless, arrogant, energetic, adaptable, perceptive, hedonistic, gregarious, competitive, entertaining, thrill-seeking, good-natured, straightforward, novelty-seeking, hands-on. They can inspire others, mediate disputes, promote teamwork, live in the moment, take risks, make tough decisions. Now, to that, they can be decisive and they can make decisions on the fly, but at the same time, if they don't necessarily like a decision, they may just choose to run away from the problem, which actually is still a decisiveness. They're just choosing to run away because it makes them uncomfortable. Let's see. Easily mock others, notice others' emotions, be quick-paced, and wants others to be as well. Now, the SE personality type, as I mentioned, may be pleasure-seeking. And in this case, their pleasures are external. An external pleasure may be sex, although that could constitute an internal pleasure, depends on what it means to a specific person. But they may also be thrill seekers. They may, do base jumping or skydiving, bungee jumping. Their pleasures are all external, and they really love to get as much as they can. Likewise, an SI personality type, all of their sensations are internalized. They may love to eat. They may love sex if it's an internal sensation for them. They may anything that gives them pleasure internally, that is what they enjoy a lot. So let me go ahead and pull out my notes for that. It's not to say that in personality types don't have their pleasures. It's just that they're not as driven by them as S personality types are. So introverted sensing. They're cold, calm, rigid, blunt, aloof, loyal, realist, thrifty, dutiful, critical, helpful, diligent, decisive, leisurely, tenacious, too literal at times, procedural, dismissive, perfectionist, and anxious. They tend to have high standards, narrow-minded. They can be detailed-oriented. They can shout down others. They dislike change. They dislike lazy people because they're active go-getters. Even though that's an I right there, they are still active go-getters. They are doers. So they hate people who are lazy. Give harsh advice, unaware of how others view them, and take downtime when they can. So perhaps a good example of an SI personality type would be Gordon Ramsay. Now, if I'm correct about Gordon Ramsay, he is, and here, I'll write this up. He is an ISFJ. J, which means he is an SIFETINE. Okay. Once you start doing this enough times, then this becomes like ingrained in you. I don't even look like, well, this is a J and that's an I. I just know it. Not that I've memorized it. I just memorize how to find the pattern. So Gordon Ramsay is a very angry person. He doesn't care about your feelings. If you're doing something wrong, he's going to tell you you're doing something wrong. He's also a cook, and eating is an internal pleasure. So, I mean, that really fits Gordon Ramsay right here. And of course, his FE, which we're about to discuss, means, as we said with F, they're quick with their emotions. They can show anger just as fast as they can show love. So, all right. So that does it for that. Now let's go on to this one. Now this one is kind of a little weird because T by itself seems very much an internalized something. It's logic, it's all about your thoughts and your ideas. So for it to be extroverted seems a little bit weird. So extroverted thinking, aloof, bossy, driven, sarcastic, arrogant, inventive, objective, dedicated, structured, analytical, productive, decisive, insensitive, demanding, competitive, opportunistic, argumentative, and straightforward. Funny enough, they make a great leader. They tend to be a problem solver, be unwilling to listen, be a fair leader, and are prone to tell the truth. They are a cause and effect thinker. If something happens, that means something caused it to happen. They can understand other people's logics, but they can easily dismiss other people's opinions. That doesn't really sound like an extroverted personality type. But like NE, when they're introduced to new information, they can make a decision about it rather on the fly. Their logic is just fast thinking, like, oh, this is a situation, let's go with that, let's go with that, let's go with that. TI, which is actually my auxiliary function, is more fitting for the T. So let's go over that. Introverted thinking. Fair, cold, aloof, blunt, quiet, patient, hurtful, critical, guarded, abrasive, negative, informed, reserved, skeptical, scholarly, hands-on, thorough, grounded, defensive, inquisitive, methodical, adversarial, articulate, reflective, principled. They tend to be bad at planning. Funny enough, being an I and being structured, they tend to be bad at planning. They're condescending. They repress their feelings. They're overly analytical, which many consider that to be a bad thing. I consider that a good thing. But then again, I might be biased since this is my auxiliary function. Loves complexity, hates being wrong, love testing ideas, and push people's buttons. So, like I said, these are snapshots, and that sounds like a lot of negativity. And it's like, who would ever want to be a T personality type? There's just so much negativity. There's a lot of good to them. And we need logical people out there, to make the world go round. Let's talk about FE, extroverted function. This is actually my auxiliary function. It's actually an interesting one. And I may go over each of the 16 personality types in detail. I'd like to, but there's a lot to discuss about each one of those 16 personalities. So, loud, fussy, hasty, bossy, warm, needy, caring, intense, gossipy, devoted, creative, idealistic, outgoing, mediator, empathic, impulsive, nurturing, defensive, expressive, gregarious, judgmental, competitive, manipulative, and hypersensitive. Manipulative often is seen as a bad word, but it can be used in positive ways. They tend to be a team player, want to do right by others, focus on feelings over truths, be facially expressive. They expect reciprocation. So if they do something nice for you, they expect you to do something nice for them. Create outer harmony, see patterns between people, be quick to anger. So there's another word that I want you to focus on, and this is going to help us understand the last function, which is introverted feeling. And I use the word empathic. Now, FI is empathetic and FE is empathic. And they sound like the same terms, but there are differences between them. When an FE dominant type is growing up, they tend to, or even an FE auxiliary type, they tend to feel the emotions of people around them. So if one of their friends is sad, they become sad. So they can connect with people a lot more easily because they understand directly how they feel. Whereas an FI, dominant or auxiliary, they are empathetic. And what they do, and this is not on purpose, this is just how their personality works, is that they emulate other people's emotions. It's not so much that they feel their emotions, but at least they can identify what their emotions are. So if they have other friends who exhibit some of the same behaviors, they can access their database of the associated behavior and easily identify it. But it's not something that they've personally felt. It's just something that they recognize the signs of because, again, they've emulated it. Nice little tidbit about that. So FI, introverted feeling. So cold, petty, quiet, aloof, bossy, gentle, private, tactful, jealous, passive, realistic, guarded, sensitive, stubborn, empathetic, instinctual, suspicious, judgmental, inexpressive, quick-tempered, and unconventional. They tend to resist hierarchy. Or they are nonconformists. They are easily distracted. They bottle up their emotions because, again, they internalize everything. That means their emotions, all their emotions remain inside. And that's why it can be difficult to understand someone who has FI because they keep all their emotions inside. They reject advice. They take things personally, but they also strive to help other people. So that about ends our discussion on this. So we have one final section, and that will be actually really quick. But you might try, you're going to start trying to take these functions out and try to figure out which ones match you best. And I urge you not to do that right now. And when I do my course on Udemy about MBTI, that is when you can actually start doing that. You can go into figuring out how these work for you. These are just like a small snapshot. Now, you can also go to 16personalities.com to try to figure out what your MBTI is, but I caution you on that. Now, nothing bad about their site. I mean, their test is fairly good, but I find personally it's only about 20% accurate. And I did extensive tests to figure this out. But I will say for 16personalities.com is that you need a human mind to figure out someone's personalities. You can't really have a computer to do it because there's context to the answers themselves. Just because you're like a fly on the wall doesn't mean that you're an introvert, but that system assumes that you are. If you're not in the middle and having fun, then you must be an introvert. If you are, you're an extrovert. And there's nuance in that. So now we're going to go to our last section. And this is going to be even quicker. We're going to discuss the 16 personality types. So I'm just going to write these up on the wall. First one we've got is INTJ, which is going to be an ITE FISE. Then we got INTP, which is going to be TINE SIFE. And then I have INFJ, which is going to be NI FETISE. My disability is actually starting to affect me, so I need to get off the air pretty quickly. Okay, so INFP. That's going to be NIFETISE. Did I do that right? I did that wrong. It's going to be FINESIE. I was going to do all of them at once, but I'm just going to start with this right now. So INTJ, that is the mastermind. They're strategic-minded, self-confident, decisive, determined, judgmental, and over-analytical. Now I have like 300 pages worth of information for each of these, which tells you how complex it really is. So this is just very simple. INTP, they are an architect. They're imaginative, enthusiastic, objective, straightforward, private, and sensitive, offensive, and they tend to second guess themselves a lot. INFJ, they are the counselors. They are creative, insightful, inspiring, decisive, passionate, altruistic, hypersensitive, private, and perfectionists. And then we have INFP. They are the healers. Idealistic, value harmony, flexible, creative, passionate, hardworking, overly idealistic, impractical, and hypersensitive. Okay, so let us deal with the other 4 introverted types. We've got ISFJ. I'm just going to write this on the side. So that is SIFETI. NE. Then I got ISTJ, which is going to be SITEFINE. ISTP, STP, which is going to be TISENIFE. And last is ISFP, which is going to be FISENITE. Okay, so ISFJ, that's going to be the protector. They're supportive, reliable, observant, enthusiastic, hardworking, practical, humble, hypersensitive, and stubborn. You're going to start noticing patterns in some of these letter combinations. ISTJ, the inspector. They're honest, dutiful, responsible, practical, stubborn, insensitive, and judgmental. ISTP, they're the crafter. They're optimistic, practical, spontaneous, relaxed, stubborn, insensitive, private, and a risk taker. And last, we have ISFP. They are the composer. They are charming, caring, imaginative, passionate, curious, artistic, independent, private, unpredictable, and competitive. Now, the last 8, which is going to be our extroverted functions. I really love that I got this whiteboard. I'm going to try to get some alternate colors so it's actually easier to see. Maybe get some thicker markers too. I don't know about that. And get some spray so I can easily clean this off. Okay. So we've got ENFP. Which is going to be NEFITESI. I'm going to rewrite that because I just ran out of room. Okay, so NEFITESI. Okay. Next is ENFJ. So we've got FENISETI. And we got ENTJ. This is going to be TENISETI. And then in this section, the last one, which is also me, as I've mentioned a lot, ENTP. NETIFESI. Alrighty, so ENFP. That's going to be the champion. They're curious, observant, energized, a communicator. They're relaxed, friendly. They tend to overthink things, easily stressed, and highly independent. The ENFJ, they are the teacher. They're tolerant, reliable, charismatic, altruistic, idealistic, or rather, they can be too idealistic, hypersensitive, and indecisive. Again, that J can kind of mean that can be indecisive about things. The ENTJ, they're the field marshal. They're efficient, energetic, self confident, strong willed, strategic, charismatic, stubborn, intolerant, impatient, arrogant, and ruthless. Just as a reminder, some of these personality types are some of the rarest personality types in the world. Most personality types are S personality types. So the fact that we tap into N personality types, and then ENTP, they're the inventor. They're knowledgeable, quick thinker, original, charismatic, energetic, argumentative, insensitive, and intolerant. Yeah, that makes me sound pretty bad. Now, something I will also say to you when you read about individual personalities is that oftentimes these personalities assume that you are a perfectly balanced person, that everything is going right in your life. So it may not fully describe who you are. This is why you still need a human mind to interpret all of that and to set it for you specifically. All right, so we got ESFP, which is going to be SEFITI. ESTJ, this is going to be TESINEFI. ESFJ, it's going to be FESINETI. And then last is going to be ESTP. This is going to be SENTPI. All right, so ESFP, that is the performer. They're bold, they're original, showmanship, practical, observant, hypersensitive, conflict adverse, and unfocused. Then there's ESTJ. This is the supervisor. They're dedicated, strong willed, direct, reliable, inflexible, and judgmental. There's ESFJ, which is the provider. They are practical, dutiful, sensitive, inflexible, hypersensitive, and needy. And last is ESTP. They are the promoter. They are bold, rational, original, perceptive, direct, insensitive, impatient, unstructured, and defiant. Okay, so that ends it for this tutorial. Now, once again, this was just a very quick run through on all of this. And as long as this is a discussion that could take much, much longer. There's actually a lot to go over. And, I just tried to scour my notes and pick out some quick things about it. I wasn't really trying to design anything. And in many ways, I kind of feel like I've done a disservice to a lot of these function types because I feel like, you might get the impression that I might favor one over the other. And that's not true. Actually, it is true. I favor ENTP above all others, but that's because that's my personality type. But I am wise enough to know that there is no superior type. There is just a lot of diversity, and with diversity means that everyone has a role to fill. And when I actually give an structural video set and all of this, I can go into more of that detail. Now, this video is going to be a prerequisite to watch on this channel for many of the other things that I discuss. So a couple of the ideas that I have is I'm going to be doing a analysis of movie characters, or rather movie, television, books, maybe. I don't know. But I'm going to be taking some characters and mapping out their MBTI and show how they compare to each other. And there's a lot of interesting revelations that we can make about characters in understanding their MBTI. I'm also looking into the possibility of doing what I call shipping, or what it's not, I don't call it that, but shipping, but basically MBTI shipping, where I take two characters from two different mediums and I say, what is their likelihood that they could be in a friendship, they could be in a romantic relationship. Of course, I'll be looking at more than just their MBTI, but MBTI will be a starting point with that. So having a basic understanding of these, even as basic as this is going to help you understand those future videos, because I'm not going to go into a full explanation of what everything means then. That's why I did this video. So anyways, that's going to do it for me today. Be sure to check out my Patreon down below. If you like what I'm doing, you want to see me do more of it, you want to see me take my production up to the next level, consider donating to my Patreon. I'm also hoping to use it to try to buy myself health insurance so that I can get proper treatment for my disability. As well, once I start getting videos published, I will also be posting that down below on places like Udemy and others. Be sure to like this video, subscribe, hit that little notification bell, share this across social media. I will say that there are a lot of other video out there that does describe this into greater detail. And if you feel up to the challenge, I suggest you go check them out. However, try to understand the concepts that I've introduced here first. Try to get a better grasp on them, because if you just finish watching this video and go right to them, it might confuse you. Go back and watch this a few times to try to really understand these concepts, because I promise you, once you start really digging deeper into this stuff, it gets really confusing fast. And I know, because I kind of just pushed myself to study this, and with my disability, it makes it even harder to understand this stuff. So it took me a long time to wrap my head around it. But once you do, it really opens up a whole world to you. So anyways, that's going to do it for me today. I thank you for checking out this video. And this is Chris Foti, also known as the MBTI guy. You have a good day. I need a better closing.